Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to be making some hot cross buns. So we are going to start out by adding a tablespoon of active dry yeast to 1 cup of warm milk. So we've got that. So 1 whole tablespoon and a cup of warm milk. And then we are going to add in 4 tablespoons of sugar. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to give it a nice stir. And this is going to help the yeast become active. So what we want it to do is to bloom and get nice and foamy. That's what's going to cause our rolls to rise. While that yeast is starting to foam, we are going to put our flour and our dry seasonings in here and mix them up. So we're going to start with 4 cups of bread flour. So we've got 1. And you want to use bread flour because it's going to give the rolls a nicer texture. You can use all-purpose flour, but I find that the bread flour really gives you that soft, pillowy roll. So 3 and 4. So we have 4 cups of bread flour. And then we're going to add in some spices. We're going to add in a teaspoon of cinnamon. There we go. So 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. We're going to add in a teaspoon of allspice. Get it up to the top there. Perfect. There we go. And then we're going to add in 1/4 teaspoon of ginger. You don't want to add too much because ginger can go a long way. So just 1/4 teaspoon. There we go. And then we're going to add in 1 teaspoon of salt. Let me grab my salt. Perfect. Now, I'm going to use my dough whisk. We're going to give this a nice stir. We want to mix it all the way up. We want to make sure all of our spices are incorporated into our flour. There we go. And then, perfect. We're going to add in 1 cup of raisins or dried currants if you have them. So I'm just going to eyeball my cup. So it's about 1/3. There we go. So 1 cup of dried raisins or currants if you have it. And then I'm just going to mix them up into our powdery mixture here because we're going to knead them all together in our dough. There we go. And then we have a stick or 1/2 cup of butter melted, and we need 2 eggs. So I'm going to crack my 2 eggs and we're going to add them to our butter mixture. So we've got 1 and 2. And you really want your butter, you're going to melt it and then you're going to let it kind of cool off a little so it's not super hot. And then we're going to mix it together. I've got it mixing. Just going to use my dough whisk. There we go. And now that our yeast has started to foam, it's nice and frothy here, we are going to add a little bit of this to our mixture. We're going to stir it and then we'll add a little bit more. And then we will add our wet mixture to our dry mixture until we have a nice dough. But I always like to make sure to mix these together first, and then we'll add them in and we're going to knead it together. And then our dough for our hot cross buns has to proof for about an hour for the first rise, and then we'll shape and then they'll rise again for the second one. So we'll get all of this nice frothiness here. And then I'm going to use my dough whisk to mix our dough together. Here we go. And we're going to come, and it's going to be a little bit of a shag, but then we're going to flip it out and we're going to knead it until it comes together nicely. So take it out of my dough whisk. There we go. Get it all off. And now you see how we have a little bit of a shag here? We want when we knead it together, it will come together nicely. And you want your dough to have a little bit of stickiness to it, but not super sticky. So if it's a little bit sticky, you just need to add a little bit more flour. But you don't want to get it to where it's too stiff. So we're going to just knead this together. And as we knead, it will start incorporating really nice. This is that traditional like hot cross buns that you have at Easter. And if you're, really festive, you could sing the song. I feel like I remember we were always taught that song in school. It was like 4th grade or 5th grade when you got a recorder because, they wanted to make everybody a musician back then. And you learned, that was the song you learned. 1 a penny, 2 a penny, 3 a penny, hot cross buns. I can still play the song. It was not very difficult to learn. It was the only musical instrument I was ever able to learn. But we're going to knead this together until we have it, see how it's coming together and it's forming a nice thing. And then we're going to do our first rise. So we want to put it in an oiled bowl, and we'll cover it up with saran wrap. And I'm going to put it in my oven that has a bread proofing setting for about 45 minutes to an hour until it is about doubled in size. Then we will shape them into nice little balls for our hot cross buns, and then we're going to let them rise again. Okay, so you see how we have brought our dough together nicely as a good thing. Perfect. So I'm going to grab my olive oil right here. And this is important. You want to make sure you oil your bowl. And I'm using the same bowl. I don't care if it has a little bit of flour or whatnot in there. You're going to put about a tablespoon in there. And then you're going to take your dough and you're just going to kind of roll it around in that olive oil, just like that. And what has happened was when this starts to rise, the olive oil will prevent it from sticking to the bowl. Because if it sticks, it doesn't rise as well. And you want it to get that nice air so it can be nice and bubbly. And then, looks like I'm out of that, so we'll just use a cloth. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a cloth over it, and then I'm going to pop this in my oven to rise on the bread proofing setting, which is 95 degrees. And that will do that for 1 hour, and then we'll come back and shape them. Okay, our dough for our hot cross buns has been rising in our oven on the bread proofing setting at 95 degrees. You can see that it has poofed up. So we're going to take this out, and we are going to divide this into 12 balls that we are going to shape, or 12 pieces that we're going to shape into balls, and then we're going to let it do a second rise. So we're going to cut them. And then we're going to cut these in thirds. And try to make them as even as possible because you want them all to kind of cook up at around the same time. And if you have ones that are much bigger, then they won't cook up as evenly. And I'm using, this is just a pastry cutter, and it just works great for cutting through your doughs. Let's see, make some of these a little bit more even. And then we'll start our shaping process. And these are our hot cross buns. They're kind of like a spiced, slightly sweet dough. And so what I'm doing is I'm just pinching them around into the bottom so we have a nice round top. And then I'm gonna do kind of 4 rows of 3. And this is to make 12. Now you could make them a bit smaller if you wanted to, but I find that dividing this dough into 12 makes the perfect size, hot cross buns. And if you have any that are slightly smaller in size, what I recommend is putting them in the middle layer because those don't get quite as much heat. So the smaller balls of dough should always go in the middle. That way they'll all kind of rise up nicely and bake up evenly. So we've got our first 3 done. And then any raisins that pop out, just tuck them in, push them into your dough when you're like making the ball. They'll bake in nicely, but since, you know, they're not sticky or whatnot, they kind of like to pop out as you go. And again, we're just kind of pinching these together into our ball, making sure you keep that top really nice and smooth. That's going to give you the really pretty look on your bun. And it's really, you just kind of pull the edges into the middle together and you squeeze at the bottom. Go. And what we had ours rising for an hour in an oiled bowl, and the oiled bowl with the towel over the top is really crucial because it helps prevent the dough from drying out and it allows it to rise nicely so it doesn't cling on the bowl, which can prevent the rising. And then what we're gonna do after we have them shaped up nicely, we're gonna just take our towel and we're gonna dampen it a little bit. And this is again to help prevent the crust or the top part of our rolls from drying out, which can then break when you bake them up. So we wanna keep it in a nice warm but moist environment. And just a few more. It is a kind of a soft pillowy dough, so it's not firm or whatnot, which is what you want. That kneading is really important in the beginning when you're making the dough because it helps build the gluten in it. That's a big one, so I'm going to put him on the outside. And I always like to take the part that's been resting down on the bowl is the most tender part. So I like to use that as my top so that it stretches nicely. There we go. And we're gonna pinch these together. And of course, there. A few more left. I'm gonna take these raisins and kind of tuck them in as I'm shaping. And you wanna just kind of grab from the edges all the way around evenly and then pinch together firmly. That one inside because it's a little bit smaller. Take my raisins that have popped out again. Now I used raisins in mine, but you could also use currants, which are slightly smaller in size. You want to use dried currants, not like a currant jam or anything like that, but those are also very common in hot cross buns. So we've got one more to shape here. And then we're going to damp our towel. And then we're gonna place these back in our warm proofing spot. I'm doing mine in the oven at 95 degrees for another 30 minutes to kind of, it's the second rise. And you definitely wanna do the second rise because that's what's gonna give you that nice fluffy roll. Okay, we've got ours, hot cross buns here. And you wanna kind of have them evenly spaced apart because they're gonna rise some more. And we're gonna take our clean dish towel and you're just gonna dampen it up. You don't want it soaking wet, just enough that it is lightly dampened. And this is gonna help keep our dough nice and moist. And we're gonna put it over and I'm gonna pop this back in my warm proofing spot, which is my oven, for another 30 minutes until it has gotten nice and big and puffy. I've been rising in the oven. We made the dough earlier. And now we're going to make the little crosses for them. So we're going to start out by mixing a 1/3 cup of flour with some sugar, about a 1/4 cup of sugar, and just enough water to make it a paste. There we go. So I'm going to start with a little bit and we're going to mix it. And this is we're going to paste on little crosses onto our hot cross buns, and then when we bake they kind of sink into the bun. And then we'll also do a frosting cross on the end because everybody loves frosting. So you just add enough water to make a nice paste. It's around a tablespoon or 2. You don't want to have too much because you don't want it to be too runny. But you want to be able to squeeze it out of a little baggie. There we go. And you want to make sure you add a good amount of sugar to it because you want it to have a nice little sweet taste. Here we go. I think this is about a good consistency. And I just want to make sure you mix it up well. So we have it kind of where it's like thick, and we're going to pipe on our little crosses on our hot cross buns before we pop them in the oven. So I'm just going to be using a little Ziploc baggie, and I'm going to just scoop in my mixture here, and then we'll cut the end and pipe it on. Now, if you want to get extra bougie, you could get out a piping bag, but I find a Ziploc baggie does great, and you don't have to waste a piping bag or get special materials. Slide this over here. Let me get a pair of scissors. And you're essentially just work it all down into one corner. We're going to give it a little twist. And then we're going to cut the tip of our bag. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pipe our little crosses on there for our hot cross buns. And these have raisins in it, cinnamon, ginger, allspice, a little bit of sugar. And so they're just like a lightly sweetened, soft roll. And then we'll glaze them with a little bit of powdered sugar later and make a little frosting because, of course, I always love mine with frosting on them. Here we go. You could also make the dough with currants if you wanted to instead of raisins. But I feel like in the United States, raisins are very common in hot cross buns. There we go. So we've got our crosses on here. Now we are going to pop these in the oven at 400 for about 18 minutes. They take between 15 and 20 minutes depending on how your oven cooks. So my oven is preheated to 400. I'm going to slide those in, and I'm going to set my timer. Let's do 18 minutes, and then hopefully that will get them done. Just depends if your oven cooks faster, 15. If you have an oven that cooks a little bit slower, do it 20. But I always things. We got to make our glaze for the top of our hot cross buns, and then we have to make the frosting for our hot top buns. So let me grab my powdered sugar here and let's do a spoon and a fork because I always find the forks help kind of mush it together. So when they come out of the oven, we are going to just lightly brush them with a simple mixture of powdered sugar and water. So kind of a really light glaze that will go on clear, but will give the rolls, which are not an overly sweet roll, they have a little bit of sweetness, but it will give them just a nice, lovely extra, kick of sweetness. So you need about 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. You don't need too much. And then you're going to mix in enough warm water to where you have a very runny and kind of clear glaze. So you don't want anything super thick. There we go. So it was about, I want to say, maybe 2 tablespoons of water. And we're going to mix it up. And this way, you want to get all there. It's just a nice little sweet brushing over. Let's make our frosting. In here, I have 4 tablespoons of melted butter. And then we're going to add some cream and powdered sugar, and we're going to make a nice frosting that we can pipe on a little cross on top of our hot cross buns. So I'm going to start with about 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. And we're going to mix this together, and then we're going to add in some cream to get it to the right consistency that we like. If you could add a touch of vanilla in if you want, but I find that the butter and cream and powdered sugar is great on its own. Okay. Give it a good mix. We're going to add a little bit more powdered sugar. Maybe about 1/4 cup more. Because I don't want my frosting to be too buttery. There we go. And now what we'll do is once we have the butter mixed in, we're going to add a little bit of cream to kind of thin it out. And this will be so lovely on top of the hot cross buns, because if you've never had a hot cross buns before, we're going to add about a tablespoon of cream. They're not super sweet, but they have a nice mild sweetness, and the glaze and the frosting gives you a bit more, but they have a lovely, they have cinnamon, ginger, and allspice, so they have some nice spicy undertones, that kind of, just give you that nice homey, delicious feeling. Some people I know will also put orange peel in their hot cross buns, but I like mine to be just more raisins and the cinnamon. Give it a good mix here. I'm gonna add a bit more powdered sugar because I'm trying to get my nice creamy things. I always go by how it looks versus the exact ingredients amount. So I'm trying to look for a nice kind of smooth yet creamy frosting that I can pipe on. And there we go. So we've got a nice thick but able to drop. This will be perfect for piping on. I'm going to grab my trivet. Beautiful. Look at these. Pull them out. They've got nice kind of golden tops to them. Turn off my oven here. And you can see that flour and sugar mixture, it sinks down into the bun as we make, as it bakes. So we've got our hot cross buns right there. And now what we're going to do is with our glaze that we made first, we're going to glaze them. So this was just sugar, powdered sugar, and water. And we're going to brush it over the top of them. This is going to give our hot cross buns a nice shiny kind of color to it and a little bit of sweetness. There we go. And this is, I will always say, this is important because hot cross buns in and of themselves are not overly sweet. There we go. And I'm just going to go back through it all again. And you want to do it right when they're right out of the oven so that it soaks into it and makes a nice little kind of crunchy topping on the top. There we go. Now let's go Ziploc baggie, which we will paste or pipe our little crosses on top of the ones that we already made. And this will just add a nice little extra sweetness to the hot cross buns. A lot of times I know when you buy hot cross buns from a bakery, they'll even give you a little tub of frosting to have on the side. Because a lot of people like their frosting on them. Okay. There we go. And we're going to put it in our bag. We're not going to pipe them yet. We want them to cool for a second. Melt right off. So here is our frosting. I'm going to slide these in. The pan's not too hot anymore. Let me just move this out of the way. So we made this. This is our butter, powdered sugar, and a little bit of cream. We're going to cut the tip off just like we did with the original things. And then I'm just going to go over that each cross with a little bit of frosting. I guess they were a little hot, but no worries. Try to pipe them quickly. And you always can save some extra for dipping on it. But it's pretty easy once you do it. I will say it's easier to pipe it on than it is to try to spread it. But they are melting fast. I guess they were hotter than I thought. But you know what? I have extra, so when they cool down, I'll repipe them and they'll just be even better.